The floorboards in our colonial house had been creaking for 18 years, but tonight they sounded different. Tonight, they sounded like secrets walking around upstairs while I sat in my basement workshop, pretending to sand a piece of oak that didn't need sanding. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Elliot Carter, Eli to everyone who matters, and I'm 41 years old, which means I'm old enough to know when my wife is lying to me. The problem is, I've been ignoring the signs for months now, maybe longer. Nina's been coming home late from her job at the hospital, always with some excuse about HR emergencies or staff meetings that ran long. Tonight's excuse was a crisis with the new nurses' schedules. At 11:30 on a Tuesday night. I heard her heels click across the kitchen floor above me, then pause. She was probably looking at the dinner I'd left wrapped in foil on the counter, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, the kind of meal she used to say reminded her why she married a blue-collar guy like me instead of some suit from Portland. The heels started moving again, heading toward the stairs. I could picture her in my mind, Nina Carter, 39 years old, still beautiful in that sharp professional way that made other men look twice when we walked into the Fisherman's Knot for dinner. Auburn hair, always perfectly styled, even after a long day. Green eyes that used to look at me like I was something special. When was the last time she'd looked at me that way? Eli? Her voice drifted down the basement stairs. You down there? Yeah, just finishing up some work. I set down the sandpaper and wiped my hands on my jeans. How was your crisis? She appeared at the bottom of the stairs, and I could see immediately that something was wrong. Her blouse was wrinkled, her lipstick was gone, and there was something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Guilt, maybe, or fear. It was complicated. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Listen, we need to talk. Those 4 words, we need to talk, they're like a breaking point for any marriage. I'd heard them before, usually right before Nina told me about some new promotion she wanted to go after, or some expensive thing she thought we needed for the house. But this felt different. Okay. I leaned against my workbench, trying to look casual. What's on your mind? Nina sat down on the bottom step, which she never did. She hated coming down to my workshop, said it smelled like sawdust and old beer. Her hands were shaking slightly as she smoothed her skirt. I'm pregnant. The words hit me like a 2x4 to the chest. We'd been trying for another baby for years, ever since our daughter Mel turned 10. Nina had gone through fertility treatments, hormone shots, the whole 9 yards. Nothing had worked. The doctors said it probably wasn't going to happen. I should have been happy. I should have been jumping up and down, calling my brother Mark, opening a beer to celebrate. Instead, I just stood there, looking at my wife's guilty face and feeling something cold settle in my stomach. That's great news, I said slowly. When did you find out? This morning. She was still looking at the floor. I took 3 tests, to be sure. And you waited until now to tell me? I needed time to think about how to handle this. Handle this. Like our baby was a problem that needed to be managed. Like pregnancy was just another HR issue she had to solve. Nina, look at me. She raised her eyes, and that's when I saw it. The thing I'd been trying not to see for months. She wasn't happy about this pregnancy. She was terrified. There's something else, isn't there? She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Eli, I need you to know that whatever happens, I love you. And I love our family. Everything I've done has been for our family. Everything I've done. Past tense. Like she'd already made decisions without me. What are you talking about? Nina stood up, pacing the small space between the stairs and my workbench. Things have been difficult between us lately. You know they have. We've been like roommates more than husband and wife, and I needed someone to talk to, someone who understood. The cold feeling in my stomach was spreading to my chest now. Who, Nina? Who did you need to talk to? Mark. My brother's name hung in the air between us like smoke from a house fire. Mark Carter, 44 years old, owner of Carter's Auto Shop on Main Street. Mark Carter, who'd been coming around the house more often lately, always with some excuse about wanting to spend time with his niece Mel. Mark Carter, who'd been divorced from his wife Lisa for 6 months now. Mark Carter, who'd always been the golden boy in our family, while I was just the younger brother who worked with his hands. You've been talking to Mark. I kept my voice level, but inside I was screaming. It started out innocent. Just coffee a few times when I was having lunch breaks. He was going through his divorce, and you know how he gets when he's upset. He needed a friend. And you needed a friend too. Yes. The word came out as barely a whisper. I walked over to my tool cabinet and pulled out a beer from the mini fridge I kept there. My hands were steady as I opened it, which surprised me. I felt like I should be shaking or throwing things or punching holes in the drywall. Instead, I just felt numb. How long? I asked. Eli, how long have you been sleeping with my brother? She flinched like I'd slapped her. It's not like that. It's not some cheap affair. We have feelings for each other, real feelings. I laughed, and the sound echoed off the basement walls. Real feelings. That's what you call it when you screw your husband's brother behind his back for, 3 months? 4? 6 weeks. Her voice was small. It's only been 6 weeks. 6 weeks. I did the math in my head. The timing worked out perfectly for her pregnancy. So the baby? I don't know. She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. I honestly don't know whose it is. But Eli, I need you to understand something. Whatever happens, this baby needs a father. A real father. Someone stable and responsible. Someone like me, you mean. Someone who'll raise another man's child and pretend everything's fine. Someone like you, she agreed. Because despite everything that's happened, you're a good man. And Mark isn't ready to be a father. He can barely take care of himself. I set down my beer and looked at my wife, really looked at her. This woman I'd loved for 15 years, who'd given me the best daughter in the world, who'd stood by me when I was starting my carpentry business and money was tight. This woman who was asking me to raise my brother's bastard child for the sake of the family name. What if I say no? I asked. What if I tell you to pack your bags and move in with Mark? Then you'll lose everything. Her tears had stopped, and suddenly she was Nina, the HR manager again, cool and professional. The house is in both our names. Mel will want to stay with me, you know she will. And Mark has connections in this town. People respect him. If this turns into a fight, you'll lose. There it was. The threat underneath all the tears and apologies. Play along or lose everything that mattered to me. I finished my beer in 3 long swallows and set the empty bottle on my workbench. I need some time to think about this. Of course, take all the time you need. She was already heading back up the stairs. But Eli? Whatever you decide, remember that we're family. Family is what matters most. After she was gone, I sat in my workshop for another 2 hours, not thinking about anything at all. Just listening to the house settle around me and feeling something inside my chest turn to stone. Nina was right about one thing. Family was what mattered most. But she'd forgotten something important. I was family too. And I'd be damned if I was going to let them destroy me without a fight. The next morning, I made coffee and scrambled eggs like nothing had happened. Nina came down wearing her navy blue suit and her professional smile, kissing my cheek like she had every morning for 15 years. Sleep well? She asked. Like a baby, I said, and watched her wince. Mel bounced into the kitchen, wearing her Millfield High sweatshirt and carrying her backpack. At 16, she was already taller than her mother, with my dark hair and Nina's green eyes. She was smart as hell and suspicious of everything, which meant she'd probably already figured out something was wrong between her parents. Dad, can you pick me up after school today? Mom said she has to work late again. I looked at Nina, who was suddenly very interested in her coffee. Another emergency? Something like that. Nina grabbed her purse and headed for the door. I'll see you both tonight. After she left, Mel sat down across from me at the kitchen table. Okay, what's going on? What do you mean? Mom's been acting weird for weeks. She keeps getting text messages that make her smile. And yesterday I saw her putting on perfume before she left work. Mom never wears perfume to work. Smart kid. Too smart for her own good sometimes. Your mom's just stressed about work stuff. You know how she gets. Mel gave me a look that said she wasn't buying it, but she didn't push. Fine. But if you guys are getting divorced, I want to stay with you. We're not getting divorced. Good. Because Uncle Mark smells like motor oil and beer and I'm not living in that apartment above his shop. The casual way she mentioned Mark made my stomach clench. How long had she known? How long had everyone known except me? After Mel left for school, I did something I'd never done before in 15 years of marriage. I went through Nina's things, her dresser drawers, her jewelry box, the pockets of her coats. I felt like a criminal, but I needed to know how bad this really was. I found it in her purse, a second cell phone, one of those cheap prepaid models you could buy at any gas station. The text messages went back 2 months, not 6 weeks like she'd told me. And they weren't just about needing someone to talk to. The pictures were the worst part. Not pornographic, but intimate in a way that made me feel sick. Nina laughing in Mark's truck. Nina and Mark at some restaurant I'd never been to. Nina wearing a dress I'd never seen before, looking at my brother the way she used to look at me. But it was the text messages that really twisted the knife. Can't wait to see you tonight. He thinks I'm working late again. Tell me again how much better I am than your brother. Maybe it's time to tell him. He deserves to know the truth. Not yet. Let me handle Eli my way. He'll come around. I sat on our bed, the bed where Nina and I had made love, where we'd conceived Mel, where we'd planned our future together, and I felt something inside me break, not my heart. That was already gone. Something deeper, something that had kept me believing in fairness and loyalty and doing the right thing. When it broke, what was left behind was cold and sharp and patient. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it and went downstairs to make a list. Not a grocery list or a honey-do list, a different kind of list entirely. Nina thought she could manage me like one of her HR problems. She thought I'd roll over and play the good husband while she and Mark laughed behind my back. She thought I was just some blue-collar guy who didn't know how to fight back. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The thing about being a carpenter is that you learn patience. You measure twice, cut once. You plan your work and work your plan. You don't rush, because rushing leads to mistakes, and mistakes in my business can cost you a finger or an eye. I applied the same philosophy to destroying my wife's life. It started with Brady Morrison, my 22-year-old apprentice who helped me with the bigger jobs. Brady was a local kid, born and raised in Millfield, which meant he knew everyone, and everyone knew him. More importantly, he was loyal to me in a way that reminded me why I'd always preferred working with my hands instead of managing people. Boss, you seem different lately, Brady said on Thursday morning as we loaded lumber into my truck. We had a kitchen renovation job in the next town over, which would give us plenty of time to talk without anyone overhearing. Different how? I don't know. Quieter, like you're thinking about something all the time. Brady was a good kid, but he wasn't exactly the sharpest tool in the shed. If even he could tell something was wrong, I needed to be more careful. Just some personal stuff I'm working through. Anything I can help with? I looked at Brady, 6 feet tall, built like a linebacker from all the construction work, completely trustworthy, and dumb enough to do whatever I asked without questioning it too much. Actually, there might be something. Over the next 2 hours, while we drove to the job site and started tearing out the old kitchen cabinets, I told Brady a carefully edited version of what was happening. I left out the pregnancy and focused on the affair, painting it as a simple case of my wife cheating with my brother. Brady's reaction was exactly what I'd expected. Pure outrage on my behalf. That's messed up, boss, your own brother? That's like against the code or something. What code? You know, the guy code. Bros before, well, you know. I almost smiled. Brady's worldview was refreshingly simple sometimes. The thing is, I need to know how long this has been going on, and I need to know who else knows about it. You want me to ask around? Carefully. I don't want this turning into gossip. Just see if anyone's noticed Nina and Mark spending time together. Brady nodded enthusiastically. I can do that. My girlfriend Jenny works at the diner on Main Street. She sees everything that happens in this town. By Friday afternoon, Brady had a full report. According to Jenny and her network of friends, Nina and Mark had been seen together at least a dozen times over the past 2 months. Always during Nina's lunch breaks, always at places where they thought they wouldn't be noticed. The consensus among the town's unofficial intelligence network was that something was definitely going on, but nobody had wanted to be the one to tell me about it. Jenny says her mom saw them at that fancy place up in Camden last weekend, Brady reported as we cleaned up our tools. The one that overlooks the harbor. She said they looked real cozy. Camden was 45 minutes away, far enough that they'd thought they were safe from prying eyes. That told me this wasn't just some casual fling. They were making an effort to be together, taking romantic trips, acting like a real couple. The knowledge should have hurt, but instead it just fed the cold anger that had been growing inside me all week. They thought they were so clever, sneaking around behind my back. They had no idea I was 10 steps ahead of them now. "There's something else," Brady said, looking uncomfortable. "Jenny heard that Mark's been telling people he's thinking about getting back together with his ex-wife Lisa, like, really soon." That stopped me cold. Getting back together with Lisa? Yeah. Apparently he told someone at the auto shop that he'd made a mistake with the divorce, and he was going to try to win her back. I thought about this new information as I drove home. If Mark was telling people he wanted to reconcile with Lisa, what did that mean for Nina? Was he planning to dump her after their affair ran its course? Or was this just another lie, designed to throw people off the scent? Either way, it gave me an idea. Lisa Carter, soon to be Lisa Hendricks again, once the divorce was finalized, lived in a small apartment above the flower shop on Main Street. She was a nice woman, maybe a little too trusting, and she'd been devastated when Mark had asked for the divorce. According to the gossip Brady had gathered, she'd been hoping for a reconciliation ever since. I found her apartment Friday evening, after Nina had texted to say she'd be working late again. Lisa answered the door in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, looking surprised to see me. "Eli, is everything okay?" "Hi, Lisa. I'm sorry to bother you, but I was wondering if we could talk. About Mark." Her face lit up with hope, which made me feel like a complete bastard for what I was about to do. But this was war now, and in war, sometimes innocent people got hurt. "Of course! Come in! Come in! Do you want some coffee?" Lisa's apartment was small but cozy, decorated with the kind of feminine touches that Mark had probably complained about when they were married. Throw pillows, scented candles, pictures of family and friends. It was the kind of place where a person could feel safe and loved. "Lisa, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that I'm only asking because I care about you." She sat down across from me, her hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl. "Okay. Has Mark been in touch with you lately? About getting back together?" "Yes!" The word burst out of her like she'd been holding it in for weeks. "He called me last Sunday and said he'd been thinking about us. He said the divorce was a mistake and he wanted to try again." "What exactly did he say?" "He said he'd been confused for a while, but now he knew what he really wanted. He said he'd been seeing someone else, but it didn't mean anything. Just a rebound thing to help him get over our marriage. A rebound thing. That's how Mark had described his relationship with my wife. I filed that information away for later use." "Did he say who he'd been seeing?" Lisa shook her head. "He said it didn't matter because it was over. He wanted to focus on us now." I leaned forward, putting on my most concerned expression. "Lisa, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but Mark hasn't ended his rebound relationship. In fact, I think it's gotten more serious." The hope in her eyes started to fade. "What do you mean?" "I've seen him around town with someone, multiple times. They look pretty involved." "Who?" Her voice was barely a whisper. I hesitated, as if I didn't want to hurt her. "I think it might be better if you saw for yourself. They usually meet for lunch at that little cafe on Harbor Street, tomorrow around noon." It was a lie. Nina and Mark usually met at a motel outside town, but I needed Lisa to see them together. I needed her to understand that Mark was playing her, just like he was playing everyone else. "You think he's lying to me?" "I think Mark tells people what they want to hear, and I think you deserve better than that." I left Lisa's apartment feeling like I needed a shower, but also feeling like I'd lit the first fuse in what was going to be a very big explosion. By tomorrow afternoon, Lisa would know the truth about Mark's rebound relationship, and once she knew, she'd tell other people. The gossip network in Millfield was faster and more efficient than the internet. Saturday morning, I did something I'd never done before. I called in sick to a job. I told the client I had food poisoning and would have to reschedule the bathroom renovation we'd planned for the weekend. Then I drove to Harbor Street and waited. Nina's car pulled up to the cafe at 11:45. She was wearing a red dress I'd never seen before, and heels that were definitely not appropriate for a casual lunch. Mark's truck arrived 5 minutes later, and I watched my brother get out wearing his best jeans and a button-down shirt that actually looked like it had been ironed. They met at the cafe entrance with a kiss that lasted long enough to make my stomach turn. Then they went inside, probably thinking they were safe because it was a new place, somewhere they hadn't been seen before. They were wrong. I'd called Lisa an hour earlier and suggested she might want to take a drive down Harbor Street around noon. I'd also mentioned it to Brady, who'd mentioned it to Jenny, who'd probably mentioned it to half the town by now. Sure enough, Lisa's car appeared at the end of the block at exactly 12 o'clock. I watched her park across the street from the cafe and sit there for a moment, gathering her courage. Then she got out and walked to the front window. I couldn't see her face from where I was parked, but I could see her body language. The way she stood perfectly still for about 30 seconds, then took a step back, like she'd been pushed. The way her hands came up to cover her mouth. Lisa stood there for another minute, staring through the window at her husband and my wife, sharing an intimate lunch. Then she turned and walked back to her car with the careful, measured steps of someone who was trying very hard not to fall apart in public. I followed her back to her apartment and knocked on her door. When she answered, her eyes were red and puffy, but she wasn't crying anymore. She looked angry, which was exactly what I'd been hoping for. "You were right," she said simply. "I'm sorry. I really hoped I was wrong." "No, you're not." She stepped aside to let me in. "And neither am I. I'm glad I know the truth." "What are you going to do?" Lisa walked to her kitchen and poured herself a glass of wine, even though it wasn't even 1 o'clock yet. "I'm going to make sure everyone in this town knows what kind of man Mark Carter really is, and I'm going to make sure his girlfriend knows she's not as special as she thinks she is." "Lisa, don't." She held up her hand to stop me. "I know you're trying to be nice, Eli, but I'm done being the understanding ex-wife. Mark made his choice. Now he gets to live with the consequences." I left Lisa's apartment feeling like I'd accomplished something important. The first domino had been pushed, and soon the rest would start falling. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. That evening, I was in my workshop when I heard Nina come home. She was humming something under her breath, which meant her lunch date had gone well. I waited until she'd had time to change clothes and start dinner before I went upstairs. "How was work?" I asked, kissing her cheek like a good husband. "Oh, you know, same old stuff." She was making pasta, something simple that wouldn't require too much attention. "How was your day?" "Interesting. I ran into Lisa Carter this afternoon." Nina's hand paused for just a moment as she stirred the sauce. "Oh? How is she?" "Not great. Apparently Mark's been telling her he wants to get back together, but she found out today that he's still seeing someone else." That's terrible." Nina's voice was carefully neutral. "Poor Lisa." "Yeah, she's pretty upset. She said she's going to make sure everyone knows what kind of man he really is." This time, Nina definitely tensed up. "What do you mean?" "You know how small towns are. Once word gets out that Mark's been lying to his ex-wife while he's having an affair, people are going to talk." Lisa seemed pretty determined to make sure the whole town knows about it. Nina set down her spoon and turned to face me. "Eli, what exactly did Lisa tell you?" "Just that she saw Mark with some woman at a cafe on Harbor Street. She seemed to think it was serious, not just some casual thing." I watched Nina's face carefully as she processed this information. She was trying to figure out how much Lisa knew and how much trouble she was in. I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. Did she say who the woman was?" "No, but she seemed pretty determined to find out." Nina nodded slowly, then turned back to her cooking. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her movements had become stiff and mechanical. "Dinner will be ready in 10 minutes, she said. "Great. I'll go get Mel." As I walked upstairs to get our daughter, I was smiling for the first time in a week. Nina was scared, and she should be, because this was just the beginning. By Monday morning, the whole town would know that Mark Carter was cheating on his reconciliation with his ex-wife. and it wouldn't be long before someone figured out who the other woman was. The dominoes were starting to fall, and I was the one pushing them over. By Monday morning, Millfield's gossip network was running at full capacity. I could tell because when I stopped at the hardware store for supplies, old Pete Kowalski gave me a look that was half pity and half curiosity. "Morning, Eli. How's the family?" In a small town, "How's the family?" wasn't just polite conversation, it was a fishing expedition. Pete had heard something, and he was trying to figure out how much I knew. "Family's fine, Pete. Why do you ask?" "Oh, no reason. Just heard there might be some changes coming." I bought my supplies and left Pete wondering what I knew and when I'd found out. Let him wonder. Let them all wonder. The beauty of small-town gossip is that it spreads like wildfire, but it also gets distorted as it passes from person to person. By the time a story makes its way around town, it's usually only half true. But the core facts remain. Mark Carter was seen with a mystery woman, his ex-wife was furious, and something big was about to happen. What nobody knew yet was that I was orchestrating the whole thing. Brady met me at the job site with coffee and information. "Boss, you're not going to believe what Jenny heard at the diner this morning." "Try me." Lisa Carter came in around 7, right when the breakfast crowd was there. She sat at the counter and told anyone who'd listen that Mark's been lying to her about wanting to get back together. She said he's been having an affair with some married woman and she's going to find out who it is. I sipped my coffee and tried to look appropriately concerned. Did she say anything else? "Yeah, she said the woman has red hair and drives a silver Honda, and she said they've been meeting all over town for weeks." Nina drove a silver Honda Civic, and while her hair was technically auburn, it looked red in certain light. Lisa was getting closer to the truth, which meant I needed to accelerate my timeline. "Brady, I need you to do something for me, but it has to stay between us." "Sure, boss. What do you need?" I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo I'd taken of Nina's secret cell phone. "I need you to call this number tonight around 8 o'clock. Don't say anything, just hang up when someone answers." "Okay. Why?" "Because I want to see how my wife reacts when she gets a mysterious phone call." Brady looked confused but nodded. "You got it." That evening, I suggested we have a family movie night. Nina seemed distracted during dinner, probably because she'd heard about Lisa's public announcement at the diner. But she agreed to watch a movie with Mel and me, which was exactly what I'd been hoping for. We were 20 minutes into some romantic comedy that Mel had picked when Nina's purse started buzzing. Not her regular phone, the secret one. Nina's eyes went wide for just a second before she controlled her expression. "I should check that. Might be work." She got up and went to the kitchen, and I could hear her answering in a low voice. "Hello? Hello?" A pause, then, "Who is this?" Another pause, then she hung up and came back to the living room looking rattled. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Wrong number, I guess." But I could see she was shaken. Someone had her secret number, the number only Mark was supposed to have. That meant either Mark was playing games with her, or someone else had discovered their affair. Either possibility would be eating at her all night. "Mom, you look weird," Mel observed, with the brutal honesty of a 16-year-old. "Are you feeling sick?" "Just tired, honey. Long day at work." We finished the movie, but Nina was clearly not paying attention. She kept checking her phone, both phones, and jumping at every small sound. When Mel went upstairs to do homework, Nina turned to me with a forced smile. "I think I'm going to take a bath and go to bed early." "Good idea. You do look tired." After she went upstairs, I sat in the living room and planned my next move. Nina was getting paranoid, which would make her sloppy. Sloppy people made mistakes, and when Nina made her next mistake, I'd be ready. The opportunity came sooner than I'd expected. Tuesday afternoon, I was working on a deck repair when Brady called me. "Boss, you need to get down to the auto shop. Something's happening with your brother." "What kind of something?" "Just get down here, and maybe bring your camera." I packed up my tools and drove to Main Street, where Mark's auto shop sat on the corner like it had for the past 10 years. There was a small crowd gathered outside, which in Millfield usually meant either an accident or a fight. It was a fight. Lisa Carter was standing in the middle of Mark's shop, holding what looked like a stack of photographs and screaming at the top of her lungs. Mark was trying to calm her down, but she was having none of it. "You lying piece of garbage!" Lisa's voice carried clearly through the open bay doors. "You told me it was over. You told me you wanted to work things out." "Lisa, please, let's talk about this privately." "Privately?" She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Like you and your little girlfriend have been talking privately? Like you've been meeting privately at motels and restaurants all over the county?" The crowd outside was growing. This was better than cable TV for the people of Millfield. "I don't know what you think you saw." "I didn't just see it, Mark. I have pictures." Lisa held up one of the photographs, and even from where I was standing, I could see it was a clear shot of Mark and Nina kissing outside a restaurant. "Where did you get those?" Mark's voice had gone quiet, which meant he was either very angry or very scared. "Does it matter? The point is, I know who she is now. Nina Carter, your brother's wife, the mother of your niece." The crowd went silent. In a small town, this was the kind of scandal that people would be talking about for years. Mark's face had gone pale. "Lisa, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You've been screwing your brother's pregnant wife while lying to me about wanting to get back together." Pregnant wife. So Lisa had done her homework and found out about Nina's condition. This was getting better by the minute. "How did you find out she's pregnant?" "I have friends at the hospital, Mark. Friends who know which patients come in for pregnancy tests." Mark looked around desperately, probably hoping to find a way out of this situation that didn't involve the entire town knowing his business. His eyes found me in the crowd, and for a moment we just stared at each other. I could have stepped forward. I could have tried to defuse the situation, maybe gotten Lisa to calm down and take this conversation somewhere private. That's what the old Eli would have done. The Eli who believed in family loyalty and doing the right thing. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started recording. "You want to know the best part?" Lisa continued, her voice getting louder. "Nina came to see me yesterday. She wanted to explain that it was all just a big misunderstanding. She said you'd told her that our marriage was really over, and she thought she was helping you move on." This was news to me. Nina had gone to see Lisa? When? And why hadn't she mentioned it? She seemed to think I'd be grateful to her for taking care of you during your difficult divorce. Like she was doing me a favor by sleeping with my husband. The crowd was murmuring now, people whispering to each other and shaking their heads. In Millfield, there were unspoken rules about these things. You didn't sleep with your husband's brother. You didn't lie to your ex-wife about wanting to reconcile. And you definitely didn't get caught doing it in front of the whole town. Mark and Nina had broken all the rules, and now they were going to pay for it. "Lisa, please." "Please what? Please keep quiet so you can keep playing both sides? Please pretend I don't know that you got her pregnant?" Another murmur from the crowd. This was turning into the scandal of the decade. "Please, just give me a chance to explain." Lisa looked at him for a long moment, and I could see her weighing her options. She could walk away now, having made her point and humiliated him in front of half the town. Or she could go for the final blow. She chose the final blow. Explain to who, Mark? Me? Your brother? Your pregnant girlfriend? Or maybe you should explain to your niece, who's going to find out that her uncle is also her baby brother's father. The crowd was no longer murmuring. They were silent, hanging on every word. Mark's face was now bright red. "That's enough." "Is it?" "Because I don't think it's nearly enough. I think everyone in this town should know exactly what kind of man you are." She turned to face the crowd, holding up the photographs like evidence in a trial. "Mark Carter has been having an affair with his brother's wife for months. He got her pregnant, and now he's trying to convince her husband to raise the baby as his own. And while he was doing all of that, he was telling me that he wanted to save our marriage." The crowd was starting to react now. People were shaking their heads, making disgusted noises, talking among themselves. In a small town, reputation was everything, and Mark's reputation was being destroyed in real time. "Lisa, that's not what? Not true?" "Which part isn't true, Mark? The part where you've been lying to your brother? The part where you've been lying to me? Or the part where you got your sister-in-law pregnant and expected everyone else to clean up your mess?" Mark looked around desperately, probably hoping someone would step in and save him. But nobody moved. This was his mess, and he was going to have to deal with it himself. I never meant for any of this to happen. But it did happen, And now everyone knows. Lisa dropped the photographs on the ground and walked toward the crowd. People stepped aside to let her pass, and she walked right past me without seeming to notice I was there. After she was gone, the crowd started to disperse, but slowly. People were still talking, still processing what they'd just witnessed. Mark stood in his shop doorway looking like he'd been hit by a truck. His eyes found me again, and this time, he walked over. Eli, I can explain. Can you? It's not what it looks like. I looked at my brother, this man I'd looked up to my whole life, who'd always been the successful one, the popular one, the one everyone respected, and I felt nothing but contempt. It looks like you've been screwing my wife and got her pregnant. What part of that needs explaining? I never meant for it to go this far. But it did go this far. And now the whole town knows about it. Mark glanced around nervously. Most of the crowd had dispersed, but there were still a few people lingering, probably hoping to hear more drama. What are you going to do? He asked. It was a fair question. What was I going to do? The old Eli would have tried to work things out, maybe suggested family counseling or a trial separation. The old Eli would have put Mel's needs first and tried to keep the family together. But the old Eli was gone. I'm going to go home and have dinner with my daughter, I said, and then I'm going to figure out how to explain to her that her uncle is a lying piece of garbage and her mother is a cheating whore. Mark flinched like I'd hit him. Eli, stay away from my family, Mark, and stay away from me. I walked back to my truck, knowing that everyone who was still hanging around was watching me go. Let them watch. Let them see how a man was supposed to handle betrayal. By the time I got home, Nina was already there, pacing around the kitchen like a caged animal. She'd obviously heard about Lisa's public meltdown. We need to talk, she said as soon as I walked in. I think we've done enough talking. Eli, please. I know how this looks, but it looks like you and my brother have been making a fool out of me for months. It looks like you're pregnant with his baby, and you expect me to pretend it's mine. It looks like the whole town knows about it now, thanks to Lisa's little performance this afternoon. Nina's face crumpled. You were there? I was there, along with about 20 other people who are probably calling their friends right now to share the news. Oh God. She sat down heavily at the kitchen table. This is a disaster. For you, maybe. For me, it's just the truth finally coming out. Nina looked up at me with tears in her eyes. What do you want me to do? It was the same question Mark had asked, and I gave her the same answer I should have given him. I want you to pack your bags and get out of my house. Eli, tonight. I want you gone tonight. What about Mel? What about her? She's my daughter too. She's 16 years old. She can decide for herself where she wants to live. As if on cue, Mel walked through the front door, her backpack slung over her shoulder and her phone in her hand. She took one look at Nina's tear-stained face and my angry expression and sighed. Let me guess. The whole thing about Mom and Uncle Mark is true. Nina gasped. Mel! Mom, please! Jenny Morrison texted me an hour ago. Half my class knows about it by now. I looked at my daughter, this amazing, strong, intelligent young woman who deserved so much better than the mess her mother and uncle had created, and I felt my resolve strengthen. Mel, your mom is going to be staying somewhere else for a while. You can go with her if you want, or you can stay here with me. Mel looked back and forth between us, and I could see her processing everything that had happened. Finally, she looked at Nina. Mom, is it true? Are you pregnant with Uncle Mark's baby? Nina opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. It's complicated, sweetheart. It's not complicated. It's a yes or no question. Nina looked at me helplessly, then back at Mel. Yes. Mel nodded slowly, like she'd been expecting that answer. Then I'm staying with Dad. And just like that, Nina had lost everything that mattered. Her reputation, her marriage, and now her daughter. I'll come back tomorrow to get my things, Nina said quietly. Fine, but make it quick. After Nina left, Mel and I ordered pizza and ate it in front of the TV without talking about what had just happened. But as we were cleaning up, she looked at me with those serious green eyes. Dad, are you okay? I will be. Good, because Mom and Uncle Mark are jerks, and you deserve better. Out of the mouths of babes. That night, I lay in bed alone for the first time in 15 years and planned my next move. Nina and Mark thought their public humiliation was the worst thing that could happen to them. They were wrong. I was just getting started. The thing about small towns is that once you become the center of a scandal, there's nowhere to hide. By Wednesday morning, everyone in Millfield knew about Nina and Mark's affair. The story had grown in the telling, of course. By now, some people were saying they'd been carrying on for years, others claimed Mark had gotten multiple women pregnant, and a few creative souls were suggesting that Nina had been planning to leave me all along. None of that bothered me. What bothered me was that Nina and Mark were still trying to control the narrative. I found out about their strategy when Brady showed up at the job site with his usual morning intelligence report. "Boss, you're not going to like this." "Hit me." Mark was at the diner last night talking to anyone who'd listen. He's telling people that Nina seduced him while he was going through his divorce. Says he was vulnerable and she took advantage of him. I set down my hammer and looked at Brady. He's blaming Nina? Gets worse. He's also saying that you knew about the affair and you were okay with it. Says you told him you and Nina had an open marriage. The cold anger I'd been carrying around for a week suddenly flared into something hotter. Mark wasn't just a cheating bastard. He was a coward who was trying to throw Nina under the bus to save his own reputation. What else? Nina's been calling around to her friends, trying to get them to spread a different story. She's saying that you and her had been having problems for months, and she only turned to Mark because you were emotionally unavailable. So that was their game. Make it my fault. Paint me as either a willing participant or a neglectful husband who drove his wife into another man's arms. Brady, I need you to do something for me. Name it. Tonight's the monthly town council meeting. I want you to make sure everyone knows I'll be there. You're going to the town council meeting? I'm going to tell my side of the story, and I'm going to make sure everyone hears it. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I bought a new shirt and tie. If I was going to make a public statement, I wanted to look like a man who had his life together, not like some pathetic cuckold who couldn't keep his wife happy. The Millfield Town Council met in the basement of the community center, in a room that could hold maybe 50 people if everyone squeezed together. Usually the meetings drew about a dozen residents, mostly retirees who had nothing better to do on a Wednesday night. Tonight was different. I arrived 15 minutes early and found the room already half full. Word had gotten out that I might show up, and people were curious to hear what I had to say. I recognized most of the faces, neighbors, customers, people I'd known for years. They all watched me walk in with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for accident scenes. Nina was there, sitting in the back row next to her friend Tina. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, which was probably true. Mark was nowhere to be seen, which didn't surprise me. He'd always been better at starting fights than finishing them. The meeting started with the usual boring business: budget discussions, permit applications, complaints about potholes. I sat through it all patiently, waiting for the public comment period at the end. Finally, Mayor Davidson opened the floor to public comments. Anyone have anything they'd like to share with the council? I stood up. I do. The room went silent. Even the council members, who'd probably been half asleep during the budget discussion, suddenly looked alert. My name is Eli Carter, and I've lived in this town my whole life. Most of you know me as the guy who fixes your decks and remodels your kitchens. Some of you might know me as Nina Carter's husband or Mark Carter's younger brother. I paused, letting that sink in. Everyone knew why I was there. I'm here tonight because there have been a lot of stories going around town about my family, and I think it's time you heard the truth from someone who was actually there. Nina shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She knew what was coming. 2 weeks ago, my wife told me she was pregnant. That should have been good news. We'd been trying for another baby for years. But then she told me something else. She told me she'd been having an affair with my brother Mark for the past 2 months, and she wasn't sure whose baby she was carrying. Murmurs rippled through the room. Even though everyone had heard versions of this story, hearing it straight from me made it real in a way that gossip couldn't. Now I've heard that some people think I knew about this affair and was okay with it. I've heard that some people think Nina and I had an open marriage, whatever that means. I've heard that some people think I drove my wife into another man's arms because I was a bad husband. I looked directly at Nina, who was staring at her hands. Let me be clear about something. I had no idea my wife was cheating on me. I had no idea my brother was stabbing me in the back. and when I found out, I was not okay with it. The room was so quiet I could hear the heating system cycling on. I also want to be clear about something else. My wife didn't have an affair because I was a bad husband. She had an affair because she's a selfish person who wanted something she couldn't have, and she didn't care who got hurt in the process. My brother didn't seduce a vulnerable married woman. He made a deliberate choice to betray his own family for a few months of excitement. Nina was crying now, but I wasn't done. I've been a carpenter in this town for 20 years. I've worked on most of your houses, fixed your problems, done my job honestly and fairly. I've paid my taxes, coached Little League, volunteered at the church fundraisers. I've been a good neighbor and a good citizen. I paused again, letting them think about that. But apparently, being a good man isn't enough to keep your wife from sleeping with your brother. Apparently being loyal and hardworking and faithful just makes you a sucker. The murmurs were getting louder now. People were nodding, agreeing with me. So here's what I want everyone in this room to know. I didn't deserve what happened to me. My daughter didn't deserve to have her family destroyed by two selfish adults who couldn't keep their hands off each other. And this town didn't deserve to have this kind of drama dumped in its lap. I looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. Nina Carter and Mark Carter made their choices. Now they get to live with the consequences. But I want everyone to know that I'm not going anywhere. This is my town. These are my friends. And I'm not going to be driven out by embarrassment or shame that belongs to someone else. I sat down to complete silence. For about 10 seconds, nobody moved or spoke. Then old Pete Kowalski started clapping. Within moments, half the room was applauding. Nina got up and left without saying a word. After the meeting, people came up to shake my hand and pat my back. They told me I was a good man who'd gotten a raw deal. They told me they were proud of how I'd handled myself. They told me that Nina and Mark were fools who didn't know what they'd lost. It felt good, but it wasn't enough. Public support was nice, but it wasn't revenge. That would come later. The next morning, I got a phone call that changed everything. Mr. Carter, this is Janet Hoffman from Millfield General Hospital. I'm calling about your wife's employment status. Nina worked in HR at the hospital, a job she'd held for 8 years. It was a good position with decent pay and excellent benefits. What about it? Well, there's been a complaint filed against Mrs. Carter regarding her conduct. The hospital board is meeting this afternoon to discuss her employment status, and we wanted to give you advance notice that there might be some changes. What kind of complaint? I can't go into specifics, but it involves allegations of unprofessional behavior that reflects poorly on the hospital's reputation in the community. I almost smiled. In a small town, the hospital depended on community support for everything from fundraising to volunteer work. If Nina had become a liability to their reputation, they wouldn't hesitate to cut her loose. I understand. Thank you for letting me know. There's one more thing, Mr. Carter. The complaint was filed by Lisa Hendricks. I believe you know her? Lisa had filed a complaint against Nina at the hospital. That was brilliant and completely unexpected. Yes, I know Lisa. She cited the hospital's morality clause in employee contracts. Apparently, Mrs. Carter's recent activities have created a situation that the board feels is incompatible with the hospital's values. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and tried to process what I'd just learned. Lisa wasn't just going after Mark, she was going after Nina too, and she was using the hospital's own policies to do it. I had to admit I was impressed. That afternoon, Nina called me in tears. They fired me, Eli. They actually fired me. I heard. Lisa filed a complaint. She said I was bringing negative attention to the hospital and violating the morality clause in my contract. Were you? That's not the point. They can't fire someone for their personal life. Actually, they can. You signed the same contract everyone else did. The one that says employees are expected to maintain high standards of personal conduct that reflect well on the institution. You're taking their side? I'm not taking anyone's side. I'm just pointing out that actions have consequences. Nina was quiet for a moment. What am I supposed to do now? I don't have a job. I don't have anywhere to live. Mark won't even return my phone calls. That last part was interesting. Mark's not returning your calls? He says we need to lay low until this all blows over. He thinks if we're not seen together for a while, people will forget about it and move on. I almost laughed. Mark was cutting and running, leaving Nina to deal with the fallout by herself. It was exactly what I would have expected from him. Where are you staying? At that motel out on Route 1. The one by the truck stop. The Pineview Motel was the kind of place where people went when they'd hit rock bottom. It was clean enough, but it was definitely not where someone like Nina, who'd always cared about appearances, would want to be seen. What about money? I have some savings. Not much, but enough to get by for a few weeks while I look for another job. Good luck with that. Eli, please, can't we work this out? For Mel's sake? Mel's fine. She's staying with me, remember? I mean, for her sake. Can't we try to fix this? Go to counseling or something? I thought about that for a moment. The old Eli might have considered it. The old Eli believed in second chances and working through problems. But the old Eli was gone. Nina, you're pregnant with my brother's baby. You lied to me for months. You humiliated me in front of the entire town. What exactly do you think counseling is going to fix? I made a mistake. You made a choice, multiple choices. Now you get to live with them. I hung up and went back to work. There was a kitchen renovation that needed finishing, and unlike my personal life, carpentry was something I could control. That evening, Mel and I were having dinner when she asked the question I'd been dreading. Dad, are you and Mom getting divorced? Probably. Good. I looked at my daughter in surprise. Good? Dad, Mom cheated on you with Uncle Mark. She's pregnant with his baby. She lied to you for months and made you look like an idiot in front of everyone. Why would you want to stay married to someone like that? Out of the mouths of babes, again. Some people think families should try to work through their problems. Some people are stupid. Mel took a bite of her hamburger and chewed thoughtfully. Besides, you're better off without her. You've been happier this week than you've been in months. She was right. Despite everything that had happened, I did feel better. Lighter somehow. Like I'd been carrying a weight I hadn't even realized was there. What about you? Are you okay with all this? Mel shrugged. Mom made her choice. Now she has to deal with it. I just hope the baby doesn't look like Uncle Mark. I laughed despite myself. Mel. What? Have you seen Uncle Mark lately? He's not exactly winning any beauty contests. That night, I sat in my workshop and thought about everything that had happened. Nina had lost her job and was living in a cheap motel. Mark was avoiding her calls and probably planning his exit strategy. Their affair had cost them both their reputations, their relationships, and their standing in the community. It should have been enough. They were both suffering the consequences of their choices, and justice had been served. But it wasn't enough. Not for me. Because they still thought this was all just a temporary setback. They still thought that eventually, people would forget and move on. They still thought they could rebuild their lives and pretend none of this had ever happened. They were wrong. I wasn't done with them yet. Friday morning brought the kind of crisp October weather that made living in Maine worthwhile. The leaves were turning, the air was clean, and I had a plan that was finally coming together. Brady met me at the lumber yard with his usual coffee and gossip report, but this time he looked troubled. Boss, we might have a problem. What kind of problem? Jenny heard something at the diner yesterday. Mark's been telling people that you threatened him. Says you're planning to do something crazy, and people should stay away from you. I loaded a stack of 2x4s into my truck while I processed this information. Mark was trying to paint me as the dangerous one, the unstable husband who might snap at any moment. What exactly did he say I threatened to do? He didn't get specific. Just said you'd been acting strange and making threats. He told Jimmy Kowalski that you'd been drinking heavily and talking about getting even. I hadn't been drinking heavily. I'd barely touched alcohol since this whole thing started. But Mark was smart enough to know that people would believe it. After all, wouldn't any man in my situation turn to the bottle? Anything else? Yeah. He also said that Nina's been getting threatening phone calls. Anonymous calls where nobody says anything, they just hang up. That was interesting. I'd only had Brady make one call to Nina's secret phone, and that was days ago. If she was getting more calls, someone else was harassing her. Did he say who he thinks is making the calls? Brady looked uncomfortable. He thinks it's you, boss. Of course he did. Mark was building a narrative where I was the villain, the crazy, vindictive husband who couldn't accept that his wife had found happiness with someone else. It was actually pretty clever if you ignored the fact that it was complete bullshit. Brady, I need you to understand something. I haven't been making threatening phone calls to anyone. I haven't been drinking heavily, and I haven't threatened Mark with anything except staying away from my family. I know that, boss, but other people might not. He was right. Mark was getting ahead of the story, positioning himself as the victim before I could make my next move. I needed to be more careful. Thanks for the heads up. Let me know if you hear anything else. That afternoon, I was working on a bathroom renovation when my phone rang. The number was blocked, but I answered anyway. Eli Carter. Mr. Carter, this is Detective Morrison with the Maine State Police. I'd like to ask you a few questions about some harassment complaints we've received. Morrison. That was Brady's last name. Was this his relative? What kind of harassment complaints? We've had reports that you've been making threatening phone calls to your estranged wife and brother. I was hoping we could sit down and talk about it. When and where? How about this afternoon? I can meet you at the police station in Millfield. I agreed to meet him at 4 o'clock, then called Brady. Your dad's a state trooper? Yeah, didn't I mention that? He's been with the state police for 20 years. He wants to talk to me about harassment complaints. Brady was quiet for a moment. Boss, I swear I didn't say anything to him about our conversations. I know you didn't, but someone filed a complaint, and now I have to go answer questions about it. You want me to come with you? No, but thanks. I can handle this myself. Detective Morrison turned out to be an older version of Brady, tall, broad-shouldered, and straightforward in the way that small-town cops usually were. He met me in a small conference room at the Millfield police station and got right to the point. Mr. Carter, I'll be honest with you. I've heard about your situation from my son, and I sympathize. But I've also received formal complaints from both your wife and your brother, alleging that you've been harassing them. What kind of harassment? Anonymous phone calls, following them around town, making threatening statements in public. They're asking for a restraining order. I sat back in my chair and tried to stay calm. This was Mark's endgame. Get me arrested, or at least legally restrained from going near them. It would make me look like the bad guy and give them the moral high ground they needed to rebuild their reputations. Detective Morrison, I haven't made any anonymous phone calls to anyone. I haven't been following anyone around town, and the only threatening statement I've made in public was telling my brother to stay away from my family. Can you account for your whereabouts over the past few days? Specifically, Tuesday and Wednesday evenings, when some of these calls allegedly took place? Tuesday evening, I was at the town council meeting with about 50 witnesses. Wednesday evening, I was home with my daughter doing homework. Detective Morrison made notes in a small notebook. Your daughter can verify that? Absolutely. What about your phone records? Would you be willing to let us examine them to verify that you haven't been making calls to your wife and brother? Of course. He looked surprised by how readily I agreed. Most people are hesitant to turn over their phone records. Most people have something to hide. I don't. We spent another 20 minutes going over the details of the complaints. According to Nina and Mark, I'd been calling them at all hours, hanging up when they answered, sometimes playing recordings of their conversations back to them. They claimed I'd been following Nina to work and Mark to various job sites. They said I'd been making veiled threats about getting even and making them pay. None of it was true, but it was all plausible enough that someone might believe it. Mr. Carter, I have to ask, are you planning to take any kind of action against your wife and brother? What do you mean? I mean, are you planning to hurt them? Damage their property? Interfere with their lives in any way? I thought about that question carefully. Was I planning to hurt them? Not physically. Was I planning to damage their property? Not exactly. Was I planning to interfere with their lives? Absolutely. Detective, I'm planning to divorce my wife and move on with my life. Beyond that, I just want them to leave me and my daughter alone. He studied my face for a moment, probably trying to decide if I was telling the truth. All right, Mr. Carter, here's what's going to happen. I'm not going to file any charges at this time because I don't have any evidence that you've actually done anything wrong, but I am going to issue an informal warning that you need to stay away from your wife and brother. No contact, no following them around, no driving by their homes or workplaces. That's fine with me. And if we get any more complaints, I'll have to take them more seriously. Understood. I left the police station feeling like I dodged a bullet, but also realizing that my options were now limited. If I made any overt moves against Nina and Mark, They'd claim I was violating the detective's warning and I'd end up in real trouble. I needed a different approach. That evening I was having dinner with Mel when she asked me about my meeting with the police. "Dad, Brady Morrison called and said his dad wanted to talk to you. Are you in trouble?" "No, sweetheart. Your mom and Uncle Mark filed some complaints that weren't true, and Detective Morrison just wanted to hear my side of the story." "What kind of complaints?" I hesitated. Mel was 16, old enough to understand what was happening, but I didn't want to burden her with all the ugly details. "They claimed I was harassing them, making phone calls, following them around, that kind of thing." Mel snorted. "That's ridiculous. You've been with me every evening this week." "I know. Detective Morrison knows that too now." "So what happens next?" "Next, we move on with our lives and let them deal with theirs." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. I wasn't ready to move on. Not yet. That night, after Mel went to bed, I sat in my workshop and thought about everything that had happened. Nina and Mark had destroyed my marriage, humiliated me in front of the entire town, and now they were trying to make me look like the villain in their story. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated me. I pulled out my phone and made a call to someone I hadn't spoken to in months. "Lisa, it's Eli Carter. I was wondering if you'd like to get coffee sometime and talk about our mutual problem." Lisa met me at a diner in the next town over, away from Millfield's gossip network. She looked better than she had the last time I'd seen her, less angry, more focused. "I heard about your meeting with the police," she said as soon as we sat down. "Good news travels fast." "In this case, it was Mark who spread the news. He's telling everyone that you're under investigation for stalking." "Of course he is." Lisa stirred sugar into her coffee and studied my face. "Are you? Stalking them, I mean?" "No. But I am planning to make sure they face consequences for what they've done." "What kind of consequences?" I leaned forward and lowered my voice. "Lisa, how would you feel about helping me give this town something to really talk about? What do you have in mind?" "The Harvest Festival is next weekend. The whole town will be there, including Nina and Mark. It would be a shame if something happened to embarrass them in front of everyone." Lisa smiled for the first time since I'd known her. "What kind of something?" Over the next hour, I outlined my plan. It was simple, elegant, and completely legal. More importantly, it would give Nina and Mark exactly what they deserved. Public humiliation on a scale that would make Lisa's confrontation at the auto shop look like a minor disagreement. "You really think this will work?" Lisa asked when I was finished. "I think it will work perfectly. The question is, are you willing to help?" Lisa finished her coffee and looked out the window at the darkening sky. "Eli, those two destroyed both of our lives. They lied to us, cheated on us, and humiliated us. Then they tried to make it our fault." She turned back to me with a smile that was equal parts sweet and savage. "I'm not just willing to help. I'm looking forward to it." We shook hands across the table like business partners closing a deal, which, in a way, we were. The Millfield Harvest Festival was going to be very interesting this year. The Millfield Harvest Festival had been a town tradition for over 50 years. Every October, Main Street was closed to traffic and lined with booths selling everything from apple cider to handmade crafts. There was a small stage where local musicians performed, carnival games for the kids, and enough fried food to clog the arteries of half the county. It was also the one day of the year when virtually everyone in town showed up, which made it the perfect venue for what Lisa and I had planned. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold, with the kind of brilliant blue sky that made the autumn leaves look like they were on fire. I got up early and spent an hour in my workshop, putting the finishing touches on my contribution to the day's festivities. Mel came downstairs as I was making breakfast, already dressed in jeans and her favorite sweater. "Are we going to the festival today?" she asked. "Wouldn't miss it. It should be quite a show this year." Something in my tone made her look at me more carefully. "Dad, you're not planning to do something crazy, are you?" "Define crazy." "Something that's going to get you arrested." I flipped her pancakes and slid them onto a plate. "Sweetheart, I promise you that everything I do today will be completely legal." "That's not exactly reassuring." "Trust me, okay? Your old man knows what he's doing." We ate breakfast in comfortable silence, and then I loaded my truck with the items I'd prepared for the festival. Mel helped me carry everything out, though she kept giving me suspicious looks. Dad, what's in the boxes? Just some things for the festival. What kind of things? The kind that are going to make this a day people remember for a long time. The festival officially started at 10 o'clock, but people began setting up their booths at dawn. Lisa and I had arranged to meet at 9:30, which would give us time to get everything in position before the crowds arrived. I found Lisa waiting by the main stage, looking nervous but determined. She was wearing a simple blue dress and had her hair pulled back in a ponytail, which made her look younger and more vulnerable than she actually was. "Are you ready for this?" I asked. "As ready as I'll ever be. Did you bring everything?" I gestured to my truck, which was parked nearby. Everything we discussed, plus a few extras I thought of last night. We spent the next 20 minutes setting up our booth, which was positioned strategically between the apple cider stand and the face painting station, right in the center of the festival's main thoroughfare. To anyone who glanced at it casually, it looked like a typical craft booth, the kind that sold homemade jewelry or knitted scarves. But the items we were displaying weren't crafts, they were evidence. At exactly 10 o'clock, Mayor Davidson cut the ribbon to officially open the festival, and people began streaming down Main Street. Families with young children headed for the carnival games, teenagers clustered around the food trucks, and older residents made their way to the craft booths and live music. Lisa and I waited patiently behind our table, greeting neighbors and making small talk while we watched for our targets. Nina showed up first, around 10:30, wearing a loose-fitting dress that did little to hide her growing pregnancy. She was alone, which surprised me. I'd expected her to arrive with Mark. She made her way slowly down the street, stopping at various booths and trying to act like everything was normal. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing around nervously. She knew that everyone was watching her, wondering what she was going to do now that her affair had been exposed. Mark arrived 20 minutes later, and he wasn't alone. He was with Jenny Patterson, a 20-something waitress from the diner who'd been divorced for about a year. They were holding hands and laughing at something she'd said, putting on a show of being happy together. I had to admire Mark's strategy. By showing up with another woman, he was sending a clear message that his relationship with Nina had been nothing more than a temporary fling. He was already moving on, leaving Nina to deal with the consequences by herself. "Bastard," Lisa muttered under her breath. "Patience," I said. "Let them get comfortable first." We watched as Nina spotted Mark and his new girlfriend. Even from 50 feet away, I could see the shock and hurt on her face. She'd probably been expecting him to stand by her, maybe even make some kind of public declaration of their relationship. Instead, he was flaunting his newest conquest in front of the entire town. Nina started walking toward them, probably planning to confront Mark about his betrayal of their betrayal. But she never made it that far, because that's when she noticed our booth. I'd spent hours the night before creating a display that looked professional and legitimate. There was a large banner that read, "The Truth About Family Values," and underneath it were dozens of photographs, documents, and printed materials arranged on easels and bulletin boards. To someone walking by quickly, it might have looked like a civic organization promoting family counseling or marriage education. But anyone who stopped to look more closely would realize that all the materials were about Nina and Mark. There were photographs of them together at restaurants and motels, printed copies of text messages from Nina's secret phone, bank records showing Mark's payments for hotel rooms, and even a timeline documenting the progression of their affair. But the centerpiece of the display was a large poster board titled "The Carter Family Tree," which showed the relationships between all the parties involved. Nina and Eli, married 15 years. Mark and Lisa, divorced after 10 years of marriage. And then, in red ink, the connections that had destroyed everything. Nina and Mark's affair, Nina's pregnancy, and the dates when various lies had been told to various people. It was devastating, comprehensive, and completely factual. Nina stopped in front of our booth like she'd walked into a glass wall. Her face went white, then red, then white again, as she processed what she was seeing. "What is this?" she whispered. "It's the truth," Lisa said pleasantly. "We thought people should have access to accurate information about what really happened." "You can't do this. This is harassment." "Actually," I said, "it's freedom of speech. Everything here is factually accurate and documented. We're not making any false claims or spreading rumors. We're just presenting the facts in an organized way. Nina looked around desperately, probably hoping that someone would step in and shut us down. But the crowd that was gathering around our booth seemed more interested in examining our materials than in helping her. "Oh my God," said Mrs. Peterson, who lived 2 streets over from us. "Nina, is this all true?" "It's not what it looks like," Nina stammered. "It looks like you've been cheating on your husband with his brother for months," said another voice from the crowd. "And got pregnant," added someone else. "While Mark was telling his ex-wife he wanted to get back together," Lisa chimed in helpfully. The crowd was growing larger now, and people were starting to take pictures of our display with their phones. In the age of social media, Nina and Mark's humiliation wouldn't be limited to the people who happened to be at the festival. It would be shared with friends and family across the state within hours. "This is illegal," Nina said, but her voice lacked conviction. "What's illegal about it?" asked Detective Morrison, who'd appeared at the edge of the crowd. "Looks like a bunch of documents and photographs to me." "They're harassing me." Detective Morrison examined our display carefully, reading several of the documents and studying the photographs. "Ma'am, harassment involves threatening or intimidating behavior. This appears to be factual information presented in a public forum. As long as everything here is true and they're not making threats, they have a right to display it. But it's embarrassing. That's not against the law." By now, Mark had noticed the commotion and was pushing through the crowd to see what was happening. When he saw our display, his face went through the same color changes Nina's had. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. "It's a public service announcement," I said. "We thought people should know the truth about what kind of man you really are." Mark started to say something, but then he noticed how many people were watching and listening. Whatever he'd been planning to say, he thought better of it. "You're both crazy," he said instead. "Are we?" Lisa stepped out from behind the table and faced her ex-husband. "Mark, you told me you wanted to get back together. You said your affair with Nina was over. You said you'd made a mistake and wanted to fix our marriage." "Lisa, but the whole time you were saying that, you were still sleeping with her. You were still making plans with her. You were still lying to everyone." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. "And Nina," Lisa turned to face my wife. "You came to see me last week and told me that you were sorry for the misunderstanding. You said Mark had told you that our marriage was really over, and you thought you were helping him move on. I was trying to... You were trying to make yourself feel better about sleeping with another woman's husband. But you weren't sorry about the affair. You were sorry you got caught. That's not true, isn't it?" I stepped forward, holding up one of Nina's text messages. "Because according to this message you sent to Mark 3 days ago, you said, and I quote, 'I wish we'd been more careful. We could have kept this going for years if Lisa hadn't figured it out.'" The crowd gasped. Someone in the back said, "Oh shit." Nina's face crumpled. "Eli, please." "Please what? Please pretend this never happened? Please raise your boyfriend's baby and act like everything's fine? Please let you and Mark make me look like a fool for the rest of my life? I never meant for it to go this far. But it did go this far. And now everyone knows exactly who you are and what you've done." Mark tried to salvage the situation. "Look, this is between family members. It doesn't concern anyone else." "Doesn't it?" I looked around at the crowd of neighbors and friends who'd watched this drama unfold. "Mark, you've been telling people that I knew about your affair and was okay with it. You've been telling people that Nina seduced you while you were vulnerable. You've been telling people that I'm unstable and dangerous. I never said. You told Jimmy Kowalski that I'd been drinking heavily and making threats. You told Detective Morrison that I'd been harassing you and Nina. You tried to get a restraining order against me based on lies." The crowd was murmuring now, people shaking their heads and making disgusted sounds. "So yeah, Mark, this does concern other people, because you made it concern them when you decided to lie about me to save your own reputation." Mark looked around desperately, probably hoping to find someone who would take his side. But the faces looking back at him were cold and unsympathetic. "And Nina," I turned back to my wife, "you asked me to raise another man's child for the sake of the family name. You wanted me to pretend that everything was fine while you and Mark laughed behind my back. We never laughed. Didn't you? I held up another text message. This one's from you to Mark, sent 2 weeks ago. Eli actually believed the story about working late. Sometimes I think he's too trusting for his own good. Nina closed her eyes like she was in physical pain. So here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're both going to live with the consequences of your choices. Everyone in this town now knows exactly what you did and how you did it. Your reputations are destroyed, your relationships are over, and your lies have been exposed. I looked around at the crowd one more time. And as for me, I'm going to divorce my cheating wife, cut my lying brother out of my life, and raise my daughter to understand that actions have consequences. The crowd started applauding. It began with just a few people, but within seconds, nearly everyone was clapping. Some people were even cheering. Nina pushed through the crowd and fled, probably heading back to her car. Mark tried to follow her, but Jenny Patterson, his new girlfriend, grabbed his arm. Don't even think about it, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. I'm not getting involved in this mess. She walked away, leaving Mark standing alone in the middle of the crowd with no allies and no escape route. This isn't over, he said to me. Yes, it is, I replied. It's completely over. Mark finally pushed through the crowd and left, probably to find Nina and figure out what they were going to do next. But it didn't matter what they did. The damage was done. Lisa and I spent the rest of the afternoon at our booth, answering questions and accepting congratulations from people who'd known us for years. The story of our public confrontation spread through the festival like wildfire, and by evening, everyone in Millfield knew exactly what had happened. As we were packing up our materials, Lisa looked at me with a satisfied smile. Do you think that was enough? She asked. I thought about Nina, probably crying in her motel room, facing the reality that she'd lost her husband, her daughter, her job, and her reputation, all for a man who'd dumped her as soon as things got complicated. I thought about Mark, who'd discovered that his new girlfriend wanted nothing to do with him once she understood what kind of person he really was. I thought about myself, finally free from a marriage that had been built on lies and a family relationship that had been poisoned by betrayal. Yeah, I said. I think that was enough. That evening, Mel and I went to dinner at the Fisherman's Knot, where we were greeted like conquering heroes. People bought us drinks, patted me on the back, and told me they were proud of how I'd handled the situation. Dad, Mel said as we were finishing our dessert, I have to admit, that was pretty awesome. You're not embarrassed by your old man making a scene at the town festival? Are you kidding? You totally destroyed them. It was like watching a superhero movie, except better because it was real. I laughed. I'm not sure superheroes usually get revenge on their cheating wives. The good ones do. 3 months later, Nina moved to Portland, where she got a job at a different hospital and tried to start over. Mark sold his auto shop and moved to Florida, claiming he needed a fresh start somewhere warm. I never saw either of them again, and I was perfectly fine with that. Mel and I settled into our new life together, and I discovered that being a single father was actually easier than being married to someone I couldn't trust. My carpentry business grew, partly because people in town respected how I'd handled my personal crisis, and partly because I finally had the time and energy to focus on my work instead of worrying about what my wife was doing behind my back. Lisa and I became friends, real friends, not just allies in revenge. We had coffee every few weeks and compared notes on how we were rebuilding our lives. She started dating a teacher from the next town over, and seemed genuinely happy for the first time since I'd known her. As for me, I was content to focus on my daughter and my work. Maybe someday I'd be ready to trust someone again, but for now I had everything I needed. The Millfield Harvest Festival became an annual reminder of the day I'd finally stood up for myself and refused to be anyone's fool. People still talked about it years later, usually with a mixture of admiration and awe. And every October, when the leaves turned red and gold and the air got crisp, I remembered the satisfaction of watching two people who'd betrayed me face the consequences of their choices in front of the entire town. It had been worth the wait.